Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our LIU LearnOn webinar series. Today's topic is face-to-face lecture to online. My name is Ben Smith. I am the Supervisor of Educational Technology here at the Intermediate Unit. And joining me today for a little bit of assistance is going to be Nicole Bond. She's our Ed Tech Specialist at the IU. If you haven't been to one of our webinars before, this is our team that has been working behind the scenes across divisions in the IU to bring you the LearnOn content. And we're really thrilled with the work that everybody has been engaging in. A couple of the norms for this webinar. The first is that chat and the microphone and camera have been disabled due to the large size of the attendee group. Now, one thing that is a little bit different in this webinar than the others is that we've allowed you to actually chat with the panelists. So the panelists are Nicole and myself. And so if you go to the chat feature, you'll see that. So in my screen, you don't see a chat button, but you do right here, there you go. And so you can chat. And one of the things that we'd like to know from you is what are you teaching? So that we might be able to talk a little bit about the particulars. So if you're so inclined, you can go to the chat button and you can type in what what you're teaching and the grade levels so that we can think about this as we talk about what lecture looks like. So we're going to be using the Q&A to post questions. So even though you can chat to us, please post questions to the Q&A pod. So again, it's located down in your toolbar here and you can see. And since many of you are typing into the chat, I appreciate that. And we may open the chat up for others to be able to share some information. But the questions that you post there, when we post the answer, we'll post that so that everybody can see. If you'd really like to use your microphone, you can raise your hand and you can enter something into the chat as well for us to be able to allow you to use your microphone. This webinar is not quite as big as some of the others that were in the hundreds for us. And then just at the end, please don't forget that you don't want to leave before you fill in the Act 48 credit link so that you can get credit for this session. So we talk a lot about these best practices right at the beginning. We want to remind you that through the continuity of education plan that the Department of Education has provided for schools, the idea is if you are providing educational services to the population, you got to make sure that all students are getting that. And the picture that we've been using looks like this, that schools that are under an extended closure are right now making a choice as to whether to do no instruction or continuity of instruction. And for those of you that are here, we're guessing that it's most likely that you are doing continuity of instruction. And then you have a choice within that of either doing enrichment and review or planned instruction. And so, you know, I see just looking through the list, I mean, we have all kinds of folks that are here from ELA, different grades, a lot of science and math folks, things like that. Nicole was a middle school ELA teacher. I was a high school physics teacher. And so we want to think about some things that relate to the idea of lecture here. That's going to be our focus in this session. Now, one thing you'll see, we sort of have a disclaimer, if you will, at the bottom there. And the idea, look, we're not going to do full-out tutorials. These webinars are designed to last about 30 minutes. And so in this time, what we really want to do is give you a chance to think about how you might convert face-to-face to online instruction. But we're not going through full-out tutorials. We encourage you to make sure you reach out to your instructional coaches. They'll be able to help you with specific support. You can also reach out to us and our team with specific questions. There are lots of tutorials. So you're going to want to pick the tool that makes the most sense for you and then begin to start applying it. So at the end of this, we hope that you'll know which tools that you want to make use of in changing from face-to-face lectures to online format. So having said that, I'm going to ask you to do another thing in the chat here for us. And in this case, I'm going to open this up just for a moment so that everybody will see your chat. So if you put something in the chat, everybody's going to see it. And I'd like you to just think for a moment, what are some face-to-face lecture activities? Just lecture, not all the things that happen in your classroom, but when you lecture, what are some of the things that happen during that time? And I'll just give you one, for example. Most obviously, during lectures, typically the instructor talks. So what are some other things that you see happening in your classroom? Go ahead and use your chat, and you should be able to type that in. And so I see students taking notes, writing on the Promethean board, and think pair shares, wait time. So those are some great suggestions, and I'm going to let you guys think about that, because when we do a lecture and you start to read some of these pieces that are going through, and everybody can see this, um, we want to break apart the little segments that you have and then think about what's the right tool for that to happen. And so I saw one student, nonverbal communication. That's a great one. And of course, in some cases, it may or may not be possible. But, you know, as a physics teacher, I know that when I'm standing at the board and I'm solving a problem out, I can look out into the student's eyes, and I can tell whether or not they get it, you know? And so that's part of the problem. I see somebody put in, I can see who's paying attention. So those types of things are really hard. But here are some of the things that we thought also take place. There's a Q&A. There's an ability for students to be able to ask questions and get answers. And when they do that, it's for the whole group, right? When you're doing a lecture, now you might have small group work where you're going around and doing individuals. But when I think about like a lecture, the Q&A that happens, one student asks a question and you can see the reaction of everybody there. So typically you probably have something you're going to display. You're going to think about a slideshow that you might have, whether it's a PowerPoint or it's writing on the board or something, but there's usually some visual piece there. And the writing on the board can accompany that. And so whether it's a whiteboard, a blackboard, an overhead, whatever it might be, you know, one of the things that I always wanted to do was to have my students working or solving problems with me where I could explain my thinking. That that type of modeling I think is really important for them. And then one of the other things that we talk about are exit tickets. So having said this, what I'd ask you guys to think about now in terms of the webinar piece is in the Q&A pod, so not in the chat, but in the Q&A pod, start thinking about those things that are not addressed on here and what questions you might have as to how could I convert this? So I saw somebody put on debates. Maybe that, you know, like if you're thinking about like, how do I do a debate in a lecture format, moving to online instruction, that might be a good question. So so those types of questions, please post into the Q&A pod, and Nicole and I will answer them together as we go along. So the next part is just to get you to think about what are your considerations for going to online instruction. And so when you go to online instruction, there's some things we want you to think about. So one is, are you going to do it synchronously or are you going to do it asynchronously? And when I think about those two questions, you know, that means, am I going to do it live like I'm doing with you guys, or am I going to do it asynchronously, which means I'm going to record it and then the students are going to work on their own. A second question is accessibility for all students. And I think there's sort of a way that we think about when we say accessibility, and part of that is, does that mean my special learners, special ed learners, my EL population, my gifted? And that's part of them. But, you know, if you're going to do synchronous, you have to think about, are all my students going to be able to join at this particular time? So bandwidth. Bandwidth is a huge issue. And so in my house right now, my wife is a school counselor, so I believe she's Zooming. My daughter is an architect, and she's working from home, and she's Zooming. And she's also accessing her material online for her planning. And my son is a college student who's doing his work. So, you know, for all of us, you know, trying to Zoom and do these things at the same time can be difficult. So when I say accessibility, that's a part of it. Another part of it might be, you might have a student who's an 11th grade student and they have to be watching the other kids while the parents are working. And so you might say, well, I want to schedule this for 9 a.m., but not everybody may be able to attend. So some of those things are going to be difficult. We've already seen like a time shifting just for parents. I mean, for a lot of you, while you're here right now, maybe you're watching your kids or maybe you're engaging in some other activities. It's tough to sort of focus in there. You also want to think about the length of time. So in a lecture period, a typical high school period is 45 minutes or so. Maybe you're on block schedule and it's longer than that. But when you did a lecture, maybe you could lecture for 30 minutes in a class period. In online instruction, chunking it and making it shorter is going to be better. So we're recommending a 6-minute maximum for lectures. And you might think, well, okay, that's really, I can get all the stuff in I need to do. And that might be true. But if you break apart the learning into and think about what is the outcome of this particular lecture. When I would lecture, lots of times I would have multiple topics that would be going on. And then I might cover 3 standards or 3 concepts in a lecture. Now I'm going to take those 3 concepts and I'm going to chunk them down into smaller sections and give them to the students in that broken apart format. You also want to pay attention to the age of your students. I know we have elementary teachers on here, even preschool teachers on here, and you want to think about 2 things. One is the attention span of those students. So again, younger students are going to have a shorter attention span. If you're talking to an AP student, you might be able to get a 20-minute lecture in there and they'll go through it or they'll rewind it to try and see. The other part of this is for your students, you need to pay particular attention to the age of the student and the legal concepts that associated with COPA as to whether or not you can use that particular tool. So COPA and FERPA, which will apply. And so if you have questions about that, please address them to your school. Make sure that your tools are approved for use by your school. Different schools are making different decisions and we don't fault them for that. And so we want to make sure that they think about that. And then the final consideration is, what is your tool choice going to be? And so when you think about your tool choice, I would just remind you, try things that are familiar to you. And if you're like, I have no idea what any of this is, try and find that one tool that'll work for now and stick with that for a little bit and then move to the next thing. For some of us, we may be adept at being able to use 4 or 5 tools combined into one. And we're going to show you some of those types of things where we sort of smash the apps together a little bit, but start out in the simplest sense. Okay. So now we're going to think about, how do you do a face-to-face lecture when you're doing it live? And live is a synchronous session similar to what we're doing here. And the first tool that you're going to use for synchronous is video conferencing. So we have developed a communication guide for teachers that talks from using texting services to phone services to video conferencing services. And I'm going to guess that Nicole will populate that into the chat. It's an 11-page document on how you can talk with students. But the particular part of that document I want you to think about is that you can video conference. So you can use Zoom, you can use Google Meet. These are 2 tools that you can use. Now, I will just say, there are plenty of others. We're highlighting examples of what you might be able to use. Okay. So writing on a board. Okay. First one is, I got my paper. This is old school style where I can have a problem written out and I can point at things and I can talk my way through it. I can get, try and get it closer to the screen so that you can actually read what's up on the screen. Those are some of the tools that you can try to use. Mirroring, mirror imaging, reversing sometimes can be a problem. You can also try to work through some other ways, but we have a couple of different tools that we'll talk about here. One is that in Zoom, there is a whiteboard feature. Now it's kind of limited, and I don't want to make use of it here in the webinar room, but I can make use of that. There's also an annotate tool that will appear so that you can circle things that are up on the screen and highlight them. So that can help you a little bit. So as an example, like I can circle in Zoom and you should be able to see that circle coming in there, okay? And then I can hit the clear button and clear that drawing out. So I'm drawing on top of something. Now, what I'm drawing with is my mouse. So, you know, there's gonna be a limit to what you can do. And when I think about, like, are there other tools out there? One of the tools is Google Jamboard. And Jamboard works very much like a whiteboard. So you can see you have some tools over here, right? And so I can start to type, but what you'll notice is, for me at least, I'm using my mouse and it's a little choppy. So that to me isn't a great solution. But if I go back over here, I'm gonna highlight another way I can do this, which is I can use something called Explain Everything. So I have a test board here up, and Nicole is connected on my board as well. In fact, I can see that I have a couple of people, and Explain Everything actually allows you, so I have my iPad and my Apple Pencil. So I'm gonna try and combine technologies here and draw on my board. So what you see, you can see my screen, which is where the students would be sitting, but I'm writing as I lean back here on my iPad, and it's coming in live from here to there. And Nicole, if she's available, she can try and draw on the board as well, so that so now you can see explainer drawing. So I'm hands-free, and yet she's drawing a nice smiley face, okay? And so this would allow me to actually work with a student almost in a one-on-one, or I could say to Nicole, please put the next step of the problem in, almost like you're calling the kid up to the board. This becomes an opportunity. I also want to highlight that you can see down here, there's actually a microphone button. And so you can do this actually without video. You can have audio going back and forth so that if you have the students joining in. Now, this is an example of one of those tools that's gone free during the pandemic that we have going on, but they do have a freemium solution, so you can have 3 boards. So as long as you're used to reusing those boards, you can make use of the 3 free boards there, and you can export your boards out. So where it has the share button, you can click and create a web video link so that you can create a slideshow that your students can have. You can export the board as a PDF. There are a lot of ways that you can make use of a tool like Explain Everything. And if I'm looking for a way, just as I'm doing in Zoom here, when I'm Zooming with my students, I'm answering questions, this allows me to grab my board and use natural handwriting to, as sloppy as it is, to be able to post information there. So those are some examples of ways that you can write on a board. Now, you can also use slides to share. In fact, that's what I'm doing now, right? I have a slide deck and it's running. And that slide deck could, another way that you can use it is with a tool called Nearpod. Nearpod has a lot of content in it, but it also has a way for you to take your slide deck and upload it in. And so one of the interesting things about Nearpod is it allows me to give a code to students and control their screen, so that if you could say to the students, I could have my sort of Brady Bunch picture up on Zoom, but tell the students log into my Nearpod, and then on my iPad again, or my phone, or my other device, I can swipe the slides and keep everybody together. I can get real feedback from them. So Nearpod allows me to ask a poll question, get students to answer. And so that's a great way to combine with the video piece to be able to keep them on the same page. In addition, Nearpod, and I'll show you this in a moment, Nearpod has a way that you can actually go and have assigned students to go through a slide deck on their own. So what do you do for the students that can't meet with you live? So while I might hold a live session and I'm swiping back and forth in my slide deck and keeping all the students together, I can assign that also out to students for them to complete on their own time. Another thing that I want to be able to do is to use Q&A. And so I want to create in this slide deck. So this is actually the slide deck that I'm in. And I can see that there are a bunch of you in here, a lot of anonymous people. But if you were if you were logged in, I would see your name. So you can see that I see Nicole's name here, and I can click on this button and it opens up a chat window. So only if you're logged in can you chat here. So for Nicole and myself, we can chat back and forth on this slide. And so if Nicole were to open it up and to come back into this slide, and I'm probably causing her to frantically get there, but thanks, Nicole. So I can chat back and forth with Nicole as I'm going through the slide deck. So again, thinking about where I am on this slide, I would be able to ask people for specific information coming in on this particular slide. And so that gives me a chance to have sort of that back channel there. And the other thing that I want to think about is the accessibility that that takes place for these types of tools. And so if I need to use it, I can actually turn on closed captioning. Now, we haven't been doing this live because we've been uploading these to webinars to YouTube, but I wanted to highlight, I'm going to go over here for a moment, and I'm going to present to get the presenter mode up. And what you're going to see, oops, is down here at the bottom, there's a little closed captioning piece that comes up. And so if I click on that, notice it sort of moved everything up a little bit, and now it is closed captioning what I am saying. And so if I'm trying to make things accessible, as I talk on this particular slide, I can actually have the closed captioning work pretty well, as you can see. So this becomes a way that if I'm recording something, I'm trying to make sure that it's accessible, and I'm not going to upload to YouTube. I'm going to record it this way, and I'm going to allow it to increase that accessibility. So those are just some examples there. And then the final piece, of course, is I want students to give me an exit ticket. And so I've created a Padlet here. And if you haven't been following along in the slide deck, although some of you are, I know there are 8 of you that are sort of watching along, what I have is a Padlet that looks like this. And so you're welcome to go there. And then you can double click and you can type something. Nicole put it in the chat. And so I would put something in there, and then I could actually upload a file, put a link in, I could take a picture, I could do all those types of things, and then that will sit on here. And then for your students, they can fill in these exit tickets. It's almost as if they're taking their sticky note, putting it on the door on the way out. They'll be able to sort of read what other people are doing there. And I was kind of hoping somebody might actually jump out of the webinar. Oh, there goes somebody who's going to post in there. And so again, this becomes another way that I can do some of these types of things. So, okay, so this helps with the face-to-face tools. What about the asynchronous? Now, I mentioned that Nearpod allows you to assign homework. And so if you look at the screen that's up front here, when I get ready to deploy a lesson, I have a choice of a live lesson or student-paced. And so what I did was I just took one of the lessons from Nearpod and I made it a student-paced lesson. And so if I were to jump over to that, so if you typed in this code, it's live. People can go in and they can try it to see, but I did that myself. So I typed in the code, I went to nearpod.com and I typed in the code, and so I would type in my name, I'm gonna hit join session, and then what happens is the student can work through this on their own. Now, I have not enabled all of the features, so you'll see some of that there, but you know, this is part of the teacher background, and you can see I have different lessons information in here. And again, remember, I just pulled in one of Nearpod's lessons. So here's the learning objective, students could go through. And then Nearpod will also have interactives that will take place. And of course, here, there's a video that the students could watch. So as you see this scrolling by, now all these things that are scrolling by, if I were in a in a synchronous session, I would be controlling that on my iPad, so the students wouldn't be able to do what they're doing here, which is click and move through. So instead, if I'm controlling it, then they all stay in the same place. Um, I saw a question about, can they print slides from Nearpod? What I would do is I would make the slide deck available in another format, so in a PDF, so that if they needed to print, that's how I would print those slides, and I would do that from Nearpod. But you can see here, there's a question, so students would type their answer, and then they would hit submit, and then that would go into me as the teacher, and I'd be able to check that at another time. And so as you go through, you'll see that that's another way that I can work with my students. So now let's think about the archived or the asynchronous tools that might be available, and then we'll get to some questions, okay? So as I think about the asynchronous tools that I want to use, it's going to be very similar. Like I want to use a video conferencing software, so I would use Zoom a lot to record. I might use Loom as well, and at the risk of causing things to go haywire, I'm going to try one more, which is called Screencastify, and I have Screencastify built into my drive. So I'm using Chrome as my browser, and I have an extension right up here that is Screencastify, and it allows me, and it's going to probably run a little bit slow now because I'm doing lots of things, but it allows me to record my screen. Now you'll notice there's a 5-minute limit per video, which is perfect because we talked about doing them in 6-minute chunks. I can embed my camera so that students can see me, which we strongly recommend. Students want to see you doing that. It'll also record my microphone, which I'm going to turn off for the moment because I'm already broadcasting here and I want my mic to be used for Zoom. And then I'm just going to hit record, but I'm going to do my browser tab here. Yeah, I'm going to do my browser tab. So I'm going to hit record, and it's going to give me a little countdown, 3, 2, 1. And now it's recording. And what I would do as a teacher is I would have my slide deck, all my tabs up at the top here, open and ready to go for my lecture. So as I jump around from one thing to the next, and I jump to a different slide, and I move through it, and then I might go over to my test board, right? And I would have all my tabs open so that that would work. Now I'm gonna jump back here, and I'm gonna stop my recording. So I click back on Screencastify and I hit stop, and it opens up a new tab, and it has that video in there, and the video auto plays for me so I can see. So when I started jumping to those other tabs after a few moments, hopefully it's doing them. Now I think I chose browser tab. I would have wanted to do my whole desktop, but I have too many things open that I don't want to share here. That's how I would record it. And then you'll notice I can share right to my classroom. I can publish to YouTube. I can even get an embed code if you're going to publish it somewhere into an LMS like Canvas or Schoology. And then you can think about downloading it if you need to. But that's going to be stored in my drive. For slide decks, slides, and Nearpod, there are other choices. Pear Deck is another one that are perfectly acceptable. We've tried to keep it a little bit simple here. For Q&A, we talk about doing a chat or a Google form or a back channel. And a back channel, so tomorrow we're going to do a webinar where we're going to talk a little bit more about how a back channel works. And I know there were some questions about doing like a live debate. And so for me, doing a live debate or a Socratic seminar somebody had posted, what I would do is I would use a back channel for that. And for the Socratic seminar, I'd actually have 2 back channels going at one time. So I'd have a panel here for people that are inside the Socratic circle and a back channel here for the people that are outside the Socratic circle. And I would be monitoring both as I work through those 2 pieces. But again, we're going to be doing that webinar tomorrow, and we'll take a look at that. So when you think about, like, again, the Q&A, oh, I did want to mention one other thing about the Q&A, a Google form. So for students that are asynchronous, how are they asking questions? And a good way to collect that is a Google form. Now, I know there's a few questions here. I'm going to take a little bit of time to answer those questions. And I want you to think about what you might take away from the webinar before we wrap up here. Um, I see somebody ask the question, how can I convert small group instruction to distance learning? So one of the things that's available in Zoom is something called breakout rooms. And so if I had a class of 20 students, what I would do is I can break them out into these breakout rooms. Now you'll have to do a little bit of professional development on breakout rooms, because you can actually, before class, upload your roster and assign everybody to a specific breakout room, or you can do it live, or you could do it random. So people just get in, you say, I want 4 breakout rooms, and then they go. Now the students will stay within the Zoom and they'll be in their own breakout rooms. You as the instructor, here's a limitation. You can only join 1 breakout group at a time, okay? And so when I think about how I facilitate that, I would jump from room to room to room, and then if need be, I can call them all back. Now, that may not be appropriate for 4th graders, but it might be appropriate for high school students who are trying to do that type of group work. And then the chat will all be downloaded together, so if students were being inappropriate in the chat, you can monitor that after the fact. I also see a question about how do I do impromptu demos of concepts needed to enhance understanding. So for me, Stephen, I don't know what you teach. I'd have to go back and look, but the one thing I would say is, as a science teacher, I love doing demos. So, and I would tell my students all the time, there's a lot of stuff in the house that I can grab and use to do my demonstrations. And so I would be standing here, and what I would do is actually stand back there. So I keep my camera here and back up so that I'm a little bit further away, and I'm going to act things out. So even though generally we sit in front of the screen, that camera actually gives you a pretty wide range of view so that you can go through and take a look at that. I'm going through some of the questions that I think Nicole already answered. She gave a great link to the Socratic seminar, but I tried to explain how we could do that as well. For Dan, the opening activity, or the bell ringer, when the students come in, so when you came into this room here, what you saw was the first frame of our video. I think if I were running it just as the bell rings and the kids are coming into your class, what I would have up front is, this is what I want you guys to be working on. And Padlet's a great way to be able to collect that information, or a Google form. So you could say, I'd like you to think about what we did yesterday, and I'd like you to type in 3 things that you learned from yesterday, or what are the key concepts from Newton's second law. Type those into a Google form, and then that form will be up. One thing that you really need to do, and part of the reason why I didn't want to share my whole screen, is that and I have my lecture here, but then I have a Q&A pod. I'm pointing and you guys can't see it, obviously. I have my participation list, I have the chat, webinar chat, I have my notes over here. So I have lots of things open and positioned on my screen in order to make my lecture go effectively, and I think that's one of the things that I would try and do. We talked a little bit about small group instruction. For student presentations, again, I think that you can turn the screen over to students. There's also a feature that is called remote control. So when you're in Zoom, one of the tools that's there is remote control, where you could have pictures up on the screen, and you could give control of your mouse to another student, and then they could roll over and they could take a look and click on something, or actually draw on your screen. So that is another way that you can work through that. The closed captioning piece, Beth, we tried to show you a demonstration of that, so hopefully that's the case. And I see there was a question about repeating it. So just for the sake of being able to do that real quick, what I'll do is, and of course you can go back to the archive, when I hit present, down here at the bottom, there's going to be a little window that comes up. And so there's the window. I'm just resizing it for myself. And then there's a closed captioning button. And if you roll across, if you're in present mode, you can always roll across and see how it went away. And then I brought it back by rolling across. So if I leave it there, you'll also notice that there is a Q&A pod. So you can use that when you're doing lectures as well, is the Q&A pod, and that's built into slides. So this toolbar is from slides, and when I hit closed captioning, it starts to caption everything I have to say. So that's the quick demo for that. So with that, I'm going to stop my share there, and I'm going to go back to this and remind you that you can find a schedule of all of our webinars on the front page of LearnOn. And so today we're right here, face-to-face to online lectures. Tomorrow, I just wanted to point out a couple of quick ones. Face-to-face to online explaining. So it's going to have some similar pieces to this, but when we talk about some other ways to get especially students to be able to present their work, that's what the focus of explaining will be. And I'll be doing that one. And then answering questions and creating FAQs will also be one on like back channeling. And so if you think about the Socratic seminars and getting students involved in your online work, that's what we'll really be focusing on, those two. And those are the ones that I'm running tomorrow. So with that, I just want to remind you that we'd love for you to fill out the evaluation. Nicole's going to pop the web evaluation into the chat here in just a moment. And we also would love for you to complete the Act 48. So there's the information on the evaluation. We'll also populate the Act 48. And when we end this webinar, you will be redirected with a screen that looks like this, and you'll have to hit continue in order to go to the short survey for your Act 48 credit. So we covered a lot of content. We have another webinar coming up soon. I want to thank you guys so much for participating in here and asking your questions. We will leave this open for just a minute or two for anybody else that might have questions. Linda, I saw you raised your hand. I'm going to allow you to talk if you want to ask a question. You can unmute and ask that question. And if you were just raising your hand to say goodbye, that's fine as well. That's fine. So thanks, Linda. So with that, we're going to end the webinar. I want to thank everybody again. Hope you guys have a really good day here. We know that these times are really difficult and challenging, but I appreciate your willingness to come and learn a little bit about how you can provide direct instruction for your students.